First of all, good morning, welcome, and here we are. We're in that first group of sessions to start this in the virtual Nerd Summit. So we're kind of the test people. What we're going to be doing is muting everyone. So if you do have a question, please put it in the chat. To open chat, you basically just click that button in the toolbar. I'm going to be checking chat when we look like we're finished with a topic. So from that point on, I guess before we start, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. And if there is any problem, go ahead and put it in chat right now so I can just take a peek. I'm not seeing anything. Maybe you're tight, but okay. So this is Drupal Views, the Swiss Army knife for Drupal. And my name is Jim Skowyra. I work with a company called the Canton Group out of Baltimore, Maryland. And if you need to reach me, you can drop me a line at that email or at my Gmail address. Also, some of the notes from today will be on a website called Assembly Required. FYI. It's basically my website when I'm doing Drupal work that I jot notes down so that I can refer to it from anywhere. And on that note, I want to talk about what we're going to be looking at today, along with views. It's going to be a very simple model. What we have, we're going to look at students and advisors. It's kind of a school university model. So we have students and advisors as content types. We're going to have a few taxonomy terms such as research topics, laboratories, and degrees. Degrees are going to be specific to advisors. Now, keeping in mind that content types and terms, they're all entities, and all these entities are made up of fields. And in the Drupal world, every field has its own table. And if you're familiar with traditional SQL databases, relational databases, this model is a little different. This is why working with SQL in a CMS like Drupal, it can be challenging at times if you're trying to write your own SQL statements. This is where Views comes to your rescue because it handles so much of the background information. It's essentially the Drupal SQL generator, and that's how you pull your content out. I'm going to take it a little further today. What we're going to do is not only pull the content out, we're going to look at ways to be able to display it. Yeah. Yes, somebody. Okay. I heard somebody coming in, so I was wondering if that was Gabe. What we'll do now, in my experience, most everything what we're going to look at today will apply to both Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, with the exception of theming and templates. Drupal 8 uses the Twig templating system. So we'll take a peek at that, but we're not going to go in depth on that. This is basically to look at how Views pulls the information out and gets it to you. So a couple of general rules when we're working with the Views is to back up your database if you can. If you're working locally, use backup and migrate. Whatever you do, because there are caveats that you can. I've seen people blow up databases in production by they're testing Views without having done it earlier in an earlier stage. So back up your database just in case. Verify that you're saving to the right display, and we'll cover that in a little more depth. And keep in mind that what you see in the Views preview in the UI is not necessarily what you're going to see on the page, because in Views, you're dealing with the admin theme versus what your regular theme looks like. So on that note, we've got our caveats, we've got our general rules going on. So let's just jump into this and see where we are. First thing I want to do is start with the Views settings. Now, when you come into Views, if you just use your coming in, and this is what you'll see in the beginning. But here are some helpful settings to get you started. We always want to show the advanced display. The advanced display normally will come up like this. but it's always a good reminder. It helps you get your bearings when you're coming into views that have already been built, to have this already open so that you can see it's particularly contextual filters and relationships. The next setting we want to take a peek at here would be automatically update the preview on changes. That pretty much is a default. This show information and statistics about the view during live preview this is by default not open. And I will show you the most important part, to me anyway, is if you do know how to write queries, this will help you understand what the query that Drupal or views is generating, because it will show you that in a preview in the preview window. And again, we'll be taking a look at that. But this is where you set those things up, get your base settings. In advanced, I have honestly never had to change anything in this caching or debugging. I work locally as much as possible, so I don't want any other things going on that aren't development centric. All right. And at that point, I shall look at the chat and see if anybody's got a question. Okay. We are moving on to the students. So, I hate it when my browser does this. It just jumps out of a window and put it back. Heck. So let's go to students. And this is the view that I've created for today's session to kind of give us an overview of all the things that are available to us in views. This is the student view is our base. This is our base view. This is the first one I created. And with that, this is the display name. This is the name that will show up here. And I want to point out that as you move through, if you do create a number of these display names, you have the option so that you can reorder them any way you want. Just over here in the edit name description, this drop down. All right. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is bringing it, we've got 3 columns here. This is, the first column is essentially the getting the information out of the database. This is where you set up what you want to pull. And in our case, we have a content type. The students have a picture. It's a very basic content type. They have picture, first name, last name, and so forth. The advisor is a separate content type. And the advisor is a drop-down. Would anybody, should I go and show you the content type? Would that help, or do we just want to roll through the views? Okay, I'm not seeing any action in the chat, so I'm just going to stay with the view UI. And we have all our fields that we're going to display on this particular student view. Oh, let me go back and just point out, when you go in and you can tell the Drupal, the view to either do just, I have display suite enabled, and we can actually, there is one display that we can use, but otherwise you'll usually see content, fields, or search. And we've got this set up so that we can add fields at will. I did mention a little bit earlier.
Can you, Jim, sorry to interrupt. This is Eric. I'm mostly trying to focus, but I've had a couple of work things that pulled me away. What's the difference briefly between display suite and fields, or content and display suite content?
This comes, the layout for this comes from the display suite itself. So if I have a content type called student, I go into display suite and we'll see a display for, I could use one of the displays for the student in the view. it's probably, it's an all or nothing thing. So probably the best, if you're using Display Suite, you have to go in and configure that to render what you want in the view. In that case, it's possibly just as well to use fields, depends on your use case. So
okay.
that's essentially what we've got there. You're basically using Display Suite's display modes or view modes. All right. Now the format, I added a couple of modules. I added the Bootstrap, Views Bootstrap. I've also got, you may have been familiar at one point with Drupal 7 with the views data export. The rest, serialization and other things are available in core, and you really don't need the views data export anymore. I'll touch base on that in a little bit here. But these are your, with the Views Bootstrap, these are the extra pieces that you will get. And you can use, now you can use Bootstrap theme, the framework for classes, rows, columns, and so forth. And I'll show you an example of that in a little bit too. What I have done here is I've hidden the title, and this is the reason for that is because sometimes you may have a title, for example, a student, person entering the student name and so forth, the student content, may want to use a student ID as the title because that's what they're familiar with. But we're also adding a first name and a last name and be able to present the first name and the last name of the student in the context of that content rather than the student ID. In this case, we are just using the title, the first name, and the last name. So, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. And to exclude that, even though it will be available to you later, you could just hit that exclude from display. And the reason that that comes into play, why you can use that, is if you don't have the title, but you need it for something later, you won't be able to access the title. So you can have it, and let's say we're going to create a special way to present this. I might want to rewrite the output. And I have an example of that actually, so let me move over to the advisor. What we've done with the advisor is actually rewrite the results through using the Twig system. So instead of rendering whatever Drupal wants us to render, we can go in, we have this field, this is the name of the field, and we find that through these replacement patterns. And here we have the advisor. This is the taxonomy term that's the name of the used in the taxonomy term. And also we've added H4. So we have our own label and can use that one instead. Sometimes you may want to strip out all HTML tags except the ones you are using, because when Drupal renders, for example, the field advisor, it may be putting more classes, divs, and so forth into the element or into the return field. So we would be able to remove those right here and allow only these. So let's go ahead and apply that. So now we have the H4 and it's rendering. Again, remember, we're looking at the admin theme, so it's not always going to work the way you want, or it's not always going to render the same way that it does in the regular theme. But we've managed to overwrite that. I could, you can call that advisory or advisors or whatever you want. Now you have control over how that particular field gets presented just by going in and, using the rewrite results. All right. For some reason, my notes are missing. So, but that's my problem. You can't see that. Do we have any questions on where we are with this portion of the first column on views? Okay. The next piece allows us to actually set up a page and give that page a path. We can add a menu. For example, say I want to put this on the main navigation, apply. And one more thing, a caveat is your changes don't take place until you hit this save button. This can also be a blessing if you need to. Oops, I didn't want to do that. You hit cancel, and all the changes you've made will not appear. But if you do hit the save button, you're in. This is gonna happen. You have to change it back. But cancel is a good way. You test your view, you work it, it works right, then you save it. Okay. Now, if we go back to the home page, we should have the students menu item, and it brings us right to it. All right. I got to update this guy because this is a different window than before. Permission. Header is something that would appear at the top, and you can, a very helpful header is the result summary, especially when you're doing in development, and you need to know how many nodes you're working with, how many the information on totals and how many are being displayed at that time. One more caveat: apply to all displays. Watch this one, because now all of a sudden this header will appear on every display that we've got across the board. So I want to make sure that I'm only putting the header on this particular page. So, and these are the options that I have for displaying, for example, the results. I can modify that at will, and just a couple of other things that you can do, but this is pretty much out of the box. It works pretty well. So now what'll happen is it's displaying 1 of 10 of 10. Okay. And I just want to point out too, it's in the header. If I can also put it in the footer too. I don't think we need to, well, you get the same basic thing for the footer that you would for the header. In this case, you might want to add a text area for some custom text. Thanks for looking, or something like that. On the pager, this is where, when you're on a page and you want to be able to display a pager out of the box, Views gives you a couple of options. We're using display all, but we could actually just do this. Again, I almost put it on all. And you have the option of being able to change it, the verbiage and so forth that comes up. Other options here. Let's go ahead and just do 3. Now, And there's you're all set. There's your pager. It's all done. It takes care of everything for you. Okay.
And this one is listing all students overall, or is this all students for a specific class?
No, this is all students. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we are listing all students. And that goes into the filter criteria. So we're only going, and this is where being able to, if you're a SQL, if you write SQL statements, this is where you can see where and the other criteria are for the filter itself. So yes, we're looking at all the students who are published.
Got it. At some point, doesn't have to be now. One of the things I was very curious is if you have multiple student views, one that lists the whole directory, and maybe then one per class, or maybe one per advisor. There are different filter criteria you might use on students.
Right.
I think you can have like a master view that controls all the field layout, the header, the footer, most of that. And then you're doing a variant just on the filter or the context filters. So you're not creating 100% duplicate views, one per,
Right. That would be a contextual filter. And we're going to touch on that here in a little bit.
Right.
Okay. There's I heard kind of two different ways to do that. You can allow the user to do that through the student search, and here's what we have here. And let me just go to the actual page. Well, that's not any. Oh, that's because I got that there. And there's another Well, got it. Eventually, I'll get this right. Sorry about that. Okay, here's the one of two ways. I'm not sure I'm going to be answering directly your question, but there's two ways to kind of get to what you want. You can use a filter, an exposed filter or exposed search. And if you have, right now we just have the last name, but you could add a filter for class, or however you have even your taxonomy terms. So if I'm going to just do the last name, boom. And again, the way we do that is right here with an exposed filter. And when you come in to do an exposed filter, you have a lot of options as to what you want the filter to actually go search for. In this case, I usually use contains, so that way you can do a partial. And in this area, you also have the option of being able to enter your own custom placeholder, so that it helps screen readers, I believe, and for tabbing through and so forth. All right. Contextual filters are going to be a little different, but we'll get to that in a second here. How are we doing on time? Okay. I did want to get, before we get too far along, did want to go into, we've established that we have fields that we're pulling out of a content type. Previously, we were just looking at the student content type. And because the student content type had a reference to an advisor, then the drop down in the content type, when we were using that reference, would give us the advisor field, but only from the student content type. In this case, we want to be able to add the advisor's information because the advisor has a first name, last name, and a degree. The way we do that is through a relationship. So what we're going to do is show you where you want the content referenced from the field advisor field that appears in the student. In that you might find you have this other content using the field advisor. This is a little different animal. So you're best off, if you're doing a student to advisor relationship, stay with the content referenced from the content type as it is in student. And that's what we've got here. So once you have this relationship established between the student and the advisor, you come in here and you will have to add to the relationship. Let me just go ahead and show you your options. Now, the fact of the matter is we've used the last name a couple of times. So how does it know which last name to use? Because we've got a student last name and we've got an advisor's last name. Well, you want, for this particular last name field, we're going to use the relationship, and that's to the field advisor. Actually, we don't need that anymore, do we? I'm going to remove it. So, and when we do that, we now are able to get the information from both the content types, the student and the advisor. And in this case, we also brought over the degree of the advisor. So, is that making sense?
Yeah.
So the unsaved change, this is where I was doing a demo, so I don't want to change those, save those changes. So I'm going to cancel out and be done with it. And we're back to where we were before. All right. So we've got to, now, the way to group things, say you want to do the student advisor and group it by the advisor's degree. Well, we would just basically go in. The best way to do that is with a table. You set your format to the table. And in settings for the table, you are able to scroll down, and we can even use the referenced advisor degree as your first field. And as you continue, if you need another grouping inside the group, you can do it here and so forth. You can get pretty deep into this. For this purpose, we're just going to pretty much use the default settings in terms of the rows and classes, but we are going to group by the degree, which we have done. And that is essentially all you need to do to get your grouping. Often you will run into situations, and particularly in the academic world, where you're sharing student information, you're sharing data information that's stored in the Drupal database. A couple of ways, an often requested export of CSV files comes into play. And with that, because again, this is pretty much built in. All you have to do is enable the serialization module, the REST web service module, and go from there. And once you have the serialization or serializer module enabled, you will now be able to add that as a format. And the way to do that, say I want to, this is locked in right now to the serializer. And the way I have to go back and create this is, remember, when I created, I can go, for example, I do a real basic, let's me say I was working with a student block and I just want the first name, last name. I'm able to create my REST export right here. And it's going to go and do that and allow me to hit the serializer and do that. And then it's going to ask me, what do you want? I'm going to do that. And we're all set. Because we already have one, I'll go ahead and cancel out of this.
Multi programming on, that's something we have to worry about. The remote management, are they doing that? Does anyone know? No, like e-control?
No, I'm sorry. Exile Cloud was mentioned to the IT guy. He seemed interested by it, but as of now, no. Okay. They do get free Exile Cloud with that. So when we do talk to the client, when we have drawings and all that, we'll be prepared for that conversation. And I'm going to actually have the 2 pieces of literature I need to give them of like, hey, this is all of the credentials I need for your Zoom rooms. Like, please give us that sooner than later kind of thing. Okay. So we can actually get these rooms set up, blah, blah, blah. So when we talk to them, like the next time we talk to them, we can have that conversation.
Okay.
Is this a conversation about the views?
User guides, or how are we going to train them?
No, it sounds like people have been dropped into our breakout room that are part of another discussion.
Yeah.
This is a kind of a known bug with Zoom. So I'm going to note this for Kelly and Rick.
Okay.
Because with Zoom being so full right now. So
Gotcha.
Full as
keep an eye on this.
Full as in bursting at the seams, I'm sure.
Right.
Okay. So we need virtual acoustic walls or something like that to block. So back to the CSV file. What we can do is, once you do all that stuff, this will just, it's going to, hello? Automatically, out of the box, allow you to go ahead and save whatever you had set up to render as a CSV file. So that's all there is to it. You take basically, and if I I don't want to turn the serializer off, but you can turn any view, anything you pull out and turn it into a CSV file. Same thing goes for, you can also do a JSON export. And if I got one here, we went and it's rendering JSON out of the box. So your life's being made much easier thanks to Drupal 8 views. The contextual filters, these basically allow you to, let me see if I thought I had one that I was using. Well, I'll get to that. I'll bring that up here in a second. One more piece about attachments. Attachments are actually views that you can insert in views. So when we go to an attachment, say you have a student view, but you also want to be able to go and get maybe some laboratory information and be able to expose that in a different view so that you don't have to combine everything and try to figure out how am I going to get all this information into one thing so I can render it on one page. Well, you can just go ahead and create a attachment and just tell it, you build an attachment view the same way you would build any view and attach it to one of your other displays. And that's all you have to do. And then when you say attach it before or after, do you want it to inherit any contextual filters, like, say, for instance, the node ID that comes in? That's the thing about contextual filters we could probably spend an entire session on, because of the nature of how it works and the things that you can do with it, because you're also able to use contextual filters to receive information from, for example, panels. Panels has a way to send a node ID or other information into views if you're using the panels views capability. I'm going to cancel out of this. And just touch real briefly on, what do we got here? Okay. When we go through this, and we start seeing our rendered results, this is where we can get into a little bit of the Twig theming and so forth, and utilizing what we have in Twig. Here we see, this is the Ralph Landers project in lowercase. So that means the content editor forgot to, just basically do the capitalization piece. So what we can do is, we know that that's the project title. I can go in, I can do a rewrite, and I just want to verify that I'm going to be able to use the project title. But I'm also capable inside the view of using a Twig call. I mean, not Twig, directive. So now you can go ahead, and we see that the Ralph Landers project now is using the Twig capabilities to create a title where we capitalize the first letter of each word. You can do a lot more with that in terms of, you could, when you're in the rewrite phase, you can start using, this is where, when we added Bootstrap, you can use HTML in here. You can do all kinds of things, and it pretty much is a way of going around the theme, the Twig templating system. So if you're not comfortable working inside as a developer inside the Twig template system, you can do an awful lot just by rewriting the results or adding global text and using these replacement patterns, because you can use Twig inside them. Some people may say, that's not a best practice. Some people who don't know the theming system that well will say, I got to get this done. And that's the way it works. All right. Well, we're coming up on 5 minutes left. So I think there was one last thing, but it's basically the theming template, the naming convention for how do you get to a template for Twig. And if I could just ask you to use the URL, I actually have it all listed out. So it might be even easier if you go here and look at the way I have it set up for you, so that you can actually see the patterns on how to set them up. So at this point, I'm just going to basically open it up, and if there's any question, go from there.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you did quite cover this, and I don't think I necessarily asked the question the right way before, but like when you were doing the view for students, there's a master view that might show all students, and you showed how you could expose a filter, which makes sense. But let's say, I want to have that base view, and I want to show a list of students. Like if I'm listing classes and looking at a class, I click on show students for that class. It would take me to that view with a contextual filter of saying that, every student is in class X. And then there might be another view showing a list of all advisors. And there could be a link that says show all students who have this advisor. And so it's that same base view of students, but it has two different instances of it. One that's displaying a list of students based on a class ID that you pass into it, and another that's showing a list of students based on an advisor ID that you pass into it. So it's two totally different contextual filters, but it's using the same base view. Is that possible, or do you have to clone that view basically and have two complete copies of that view?
If you're changing anything like the contextual filter, yeah, you would have to create a new
A clone of it?
the view, yeah.
Okay. And if you make any change in one of them, then you just got to go make that same change in the others if you want them to all be consistent.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
I'm adding the, I was asked to put that assembly required URL in. And because I'm working in a virtual machine outside of chat, I have to go ahead and do this the old-fashioned way, manually.
I added it in there for you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Well, then it's coffee time. If everybody's ready to roll, then that's it. I didn't touch on the block, but that's pretty much, we had the block. I apologize for not, but that would be the student block. You go into your block layout. And this is a little trick that helps when you're trying to place the block. And we have the student block. Is when you go to place a block and it's something you've created in views, rather than having to go through, where did I put it? Where is it? You know, because you might have forgotten to name it some way, or you have a naming convention that you were using, but it didn't work. Look under category, because it's right there in your list views. And that's a quick way to find it, and we can insert it, and we've already done that. And that's where that view block is coming in. So that anything you render in a block in views, you can place that. And just one more piece on, say I just wanted to show that block on particular pages. I know we're getting a little away from the views, but sometimes you want to be able to just show it on the front page on a particular, maybe it's just student listing pages that you only want to see that block on. And that's where you would do this inside the configure block settings. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. I guess we're going to wrap it up here.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right.